All right, welcome everybody to the Inside In Tennis Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Michals, here on the Believe Network. Tons of great content of all sports, especially tennis, as we gear up for the 2025 Wimbledon Championships. And my guest on this week's show, where do you start? It's really a great opportunity to talk with one of the premier voices in all of sports. He's covered so many different avenues. He's been at ESPN for probably longer than he wants to admit, covering college football, was the visionary behind Game Day, the lead play-by-play for college football for many, many years. Also the lead voice for tennis on ESPN since about 2003, Australia, US Open, Wimbledon, the voice behind so many matches. Chris Fowler joining the show. Chris, it's a blast to talk to you. Also, I should point out, you hosted one of my favorite shows as a kid, the Sports Century Greatest Athletes of the 20th century. So I did appreciate that as well, but thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thanks, Mitch. I appreciate it. Looking forward to this. It's fun for me to talk tennis with an audience that really gets it. When I do interviews about tennis or something, we stray into tennis on some kind of a podcast or interview, I'm cognizant of the fact that not many listening are actually dialed in, but I know with your audience, this will be fun.
Yeah, it really will be. And I know your vantage point for some of the great tennis, legendary performances of the last couple of years has been remarkable. I wanted to start from the beginning and work our way up. And I ask this to athletes and broadcasters a lot of the time. Did you mark the calendar? Because you're in the football world, obviously, but is your calendar marked by tennis events? You have 10 polls like, okay, Christmas time, that means Australia is coming soon, or 4th of July, that must mean Wimbledon. Are you looking at the calendar that same way?
After all these years, for sure. I mean, it's like muscle memory. I get to a certain point of the year, and I feel like I start thinking about Wimbledon. I start thinking about the dry cleaners, setting up the gym, all the logistical things that you do when you go relocate to a small English village for 2.5 weeks. And Australia comes right in the back of college football season. So I've gotten used to, calling the championship game in one sport, jumping a plane and going down to Australia with no break and parachuting into the Australian summer and covering that great Grand Slam. And I get to keep doing that now because the tennis calendar is going to allow, with the Aussie moving back a little bit later in 26 to not miss most of it, which I had to last year. But no, I mean, I've been a tennis fan longer than I was a football fan of college football because, I came of age as a tennis fan in the early 70s when Jimmy was coming along, Connors, and then later John. And it's so interesting to work with John and work with Chris Evert and those kind of people that were rock stars in the sport when I was first latching onto it in the early 70s. But I've been a fan that long. And so you mentioned 2003. That was a dream when ESPN finally got enough tennis rights that I was able to convince them to go cover it and get off of some college basketball, some sports center, some things that I've been tying me down and keeping me from doing tennis. And so it's been an amazing run. You talked to all of us, the tennis fans, pundits have been able to enjoy this incredible era. And it just, I count my blessings every time I show up. And now we're into an exciting new era that I'm sure we'll talk about. But I have just loved every second of being a small part of the sport for 20-some years.
Right, and you said a lot that I want to get to. I don't think many people realize how much tennis meant to you even before you became the voice. Like it was a core of who you were as a sports fan. The first thing you said that struck a chord for people that weren't around there, was it really like the ushering in of a rock star era? Because there's this taboo thought of what tennis was like pre-open era, what it was like starting out in the early 70s. But Jimmy Connors, Chrissy Evert, John McEnroe, how big of a game changer for maybe the younger audience was that when they came on the scene and really changed the perception of tennis?
Yeah, we're going through that now a little bit. I didn't care about Laver, Rosewall, Newton. I didn't care about the Aussie legends, man. Those guys are older people. When Jimmy came along and was dominating at 21 and winning everything, and I was just transfixed by that. His personality obviously spoke to younger people. He didn't give a shit, and he was out there to intimidate and dominate. He's like 5'10", right? So that interested me. I tried to play with the T2000, probably one of the worst rackets ever created. Sorry, Wilson, but because he had one, and I tried to model the game after that, not understanding at that point that to play that style you had to have incredible skill and eyesight. So I gave that up, and later on got the Borg Donné racket and to try to play like him. But it was just so cool to arrive into the sport as a fan in that era, because soon after that, John came along and Borg, and you had these amazing rivalries developing. John and Jimmy obviously couldn't stand each other. That made it exciting.
Right.
And Nastasi was still around, and you had characters like Billie Jean was still playing. Then along came Chrissy and Martina. It was awesome to sort of latch onto the sport, and like millions of other people who came of age in that time, become tennis fans for life.
Were you one of the people that just wanted to, because I know broadcasting is what you're known for, obviously, but you hosted a lot of these shows, right? It was the tennis coverage, it was College Football Game Day, which is an iconic show, obviously, but was play-by-play the end goal? You were looking at it like, okay, I'm going to get my foot in the door, for lack of a better term. I wanted to be involved in the coverage and build towards being a broadcaster?
I don't think about end goals usually. I mean, documenting live sports was always what I wanted to do in this business since I was 10 years old. That was what first attracted me to it, was the excitement of somehow being able to convey what a live event was like. And when I was a kid growing up outside of Chicago, listening to Cubs games or Blackhawks games on the radio and TV, it was that aspect of it. It was the roar of the crowd. It was the energy of a live event. So hosting became something that kind of fell to me when game day came open, and you mentioned Sports Century and things like that. And I'm very proud of doing that. I love hosting, working with analysts and that kind of thing. But that never was the intent for me. And then in tennis, obviously I had been a host. I had done a lot of studio stuff, Final Fours, college football, other things. So that was the role that fit most naturally when I came aboard the tennis project. I'm not saying I sat there and go, get out of the way, Cliff Drysdale and Dick Enberg. I want to call matches. I mean, those guys are legends. And to learn from them and be around them was awesome. But when the opportunity came to get in the booth, I jumped it. I wasn't necessarily ready. I mean, I'll tell you a story. With all humility, I'm someone, by the way, who, even though I've done this a long time, believes that we need to constantly improve. And I try to, in small ways, get better at this job every year when it comes to calling tennis matches or calling football games. Right. But I was not ready to call big matches in 2003 at the Australian Open when they threw me in there. And if Mary will ever listen to this, she would nod her head. I mean, I worked with her in a Serena versus Venus final, okay? Like Serena going for the slam. I don't know what the hell I was doing in there. I didn't lobby for the position. Right. I promise that. I wasn't going to turn it down when they say, hey, call the women's final. But I certainly was unpolished, to put it mildly. And it would be a cringe fest to listen to that. So sometimes you just have to take the opportunities when they're there and hopefully grow into it. But there's always the suspicion, Mitch, as you know, when someone comes to tennis from a different sport. Right. Fans, wait a second. No. What do you know? Nothing about this. You don't feel the sport. You're coming from a football background or a basketball or hockey background. You guys do a good job jumping into tennis recently, who didn't have a huge background in doing it and doing a great job, much better job than I did as a kid, because I was pretty inexperienced in play-by-play period back then, less tennis. But it's something that you get your reps, and now I'm very proud of the fact that at one point we did all four majors, and I didn't get to call finals in all four, but we 15 years of Roland Garros was a thrill. And now to be able to do finals in 3 of the 4 is something I'm grateful for every single day.
Yeah, you've had your voice synonymous with tennis. It's very, admirable in a lot of ways that you admit, look, I wasn't the broadcaster I was. I've gotten better. I've had to get better. You're never going to be 100% ready for a Serena Venus final, especially when you're thrown right in. But I think, as you highlighted, there's a lot of progress there. There's a lot of leading on athletes, and tennis coverage is great in a lot of ways. One of the things I appreciate is there's so many legends that are still involved in the sport calling matches. As your role as a broadcaster, Chris, you have to, by necessity, you have to be willing to adapt and kind of be a chameleon with your styles. You have a great all-star cast. I've gotten to know some of them in Pam Shriver, in Brad Gilbert a little bit, and some of the other people you've called matches with, Patrick McEnroe, John, of course. But how is that challenge, not just stepping into this new world, but also having to adjust your style to fit the analyst?
Oh, man, it's a challenge, but that's part of the fun of the job for me, is working with analysts and trying to figure out how to get the best out of them. Whatever their style is, whatever perspective, whatever lens they view the sport through. It's my job to bring out the best in them, make them comfortable, and fill in the gaps. And in tennis, it's a unique thing because you mentioned some of the people, Darren Cahill, Mary Jo Fernandez, Chrissy, all these people are very different personalities. They played differently when they were active. They call matches differently. They see them differently. And that's so cool because football, you get very familiar. Kirk Herbstreit and I worked together for almost 30 football seasons. Not all of them in the booth, but we know each other very well. In tennis, you get to know them well also, but you might work with Chrissy in the morning and Darren Cahill in the afternoon. I mean, it's so cool to have to adapt and adjust to that, and you'll learn from them. Fundamentally, that's the main thing. You're talking about brilliant tennis minds who have singular experiences that they bring to the job, and so hanging around and sponging up, especially in the early years, their tennis knowledge and getting to get inside the head of John McEnroe, which sounds crazy. It's fun, but at this point, I sort of know how John's going to see things and what he's likely to say, and I can lead him into a direction, and then just hang on for dear life when he takes it in his own direction. But that's just all part of the fun and the challenge of doing this. If you're a play-by-play guy and you don't relish the chance to work with, learn from, and bounce off of these analysts, then you're sort of missing the point.
Are they working with you off the court too? I know you said you like to play a little bit. Are they working on your game, giving you some pointers too?
Oh man, I've had wrecked shoulders for a couple of years that I've repaired with stem cell injections. So I want to get back on the court because you can do more normal things, but swinging a racket with violence is one of the last things you can do when you're trying to rebuild your shoulders. I never had any kind of game, to be honest with you. I mean, I played as a kid, banging around in high school era tennis, but I love to play. I have hit at Wimbledon. I've hit with some of those people you talked about. When you hit with a very consistent person who never misses, your game gets better, right? Couples tennis erodes your game.
Wow. Yeah.
But I'm blaming. But so I'm someone that I'm very enthusiastic about it. I'm going to get back out there, but yeah, hitting not on the main court at Wimbledon because that's not allowed. I try to follow the rules. One time at Wimbledon, I stepped out on a grass court, a practice court, but it was actually not a practice court. It was actually a smaller court, but it was a tournament court before the tournament started to see what it was like to return Isner's serve on grass. And Jan and I were, pretty close at that point, and he's having a practice. And I stepped out there in non-white clothes, which is obviously a no-no, and had him serve just so I would get a sense of what that was like on any court, much less on grass. And that was the one time I've stepped on a tournament court at Wimbledon, and it didn't last very long. And it didn't go over very well either, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, hey, it's the life experience.
I got my racket on the ball. I just netted the return, but I did make contact with an Isner serve. He told me where he was going to put it. I wasn't having to read that. He did say, I'm going to hit a kicker here. I'm going to go tee to the backhand, and so I had a head start. But no, it's playing tennis is not part of the joy for me when I go to these tournaments, though.
It's a slight win, though. You got a racket on Isner's serve, so you see it. You saw it so many times.
I actually got solid contact, but
that's great.
Where the hell?
Yeah, and I wanted to ask too because you have football and tennis, obviously, and there's certain parts of the year. Australia is also when you're calling the national championship for college football. You are someone that obviously prides yourself on preparation. Those stories are legendary, putting the work in beforehand. But how does your brain work at that time of year? Because you can prepare, you can dedicate the entire day, but you're calling two different sports. I've heard you in other interviews say tennis requires restraint and not really seeing everything and just commenting on it. So how are you able to kind of maybe adjust your brain to call different sports that close on the timeline?
Well, it takes practice. I've done it a lot of years. People think it's insane to call a championship game in football, for 20 million people and then get on a plane and get down there and call matches that are in the States or in the middle of the night. And how first of all, how would you be motivated to do that? But it's easy if you love the sport. You're down there in the Aussie sunshine, and everybody's saying Happy New Year. A new tennis season, as you know, is starting. and there's an energy to that. I happen to love Melbourne a lot, and just being grateful for the chance to do it. So I don't really overthink it. They are really different sports to call, tennis and football, as you said. So it requires just a completely different approach, but that's part of the fun. And I like them equally. I don't have a favorite. I mean, I think Wimbledon, I've said, is my favorite event to cover, but it's right there with the Rose Bowl, which I think is the pinnacle of college football in terms of history and setting. So, I don't really think too much about that. It's second nature, but I do understand why people view it as a challenge. Jim Nantz for years went from the Final Four to the Masters, very different sports to call, and now it's almost second nature. The people in the business lucky enough to do big events are being called upon to do things that have never been done before in terms of quick turnaround shifts, the tonnage of their assignments.
Yeah.
Joe Buck bounces from NFL to World Series and has done that for a while. So, I don't think about it too much. When I'm there, it's all 100% tennis, and I think your mind shifts to that mode.
Well, very well said. We've got more with Chris Fowler here on the Inside In Tennis podcast, talking with the ESPN voice of tennis and college football about a lot of different topics about his upbringing in broadcasting, tennis right now, the eras that we're getting into. But Chris, as I kind of alluded to, and we've been talking about, timing is everything. You've showed impeccable timing in a lot of areas in your life, one being your tennis broadcasting rose with the Big Three era. So you look at when you started, you basically got an entire era of the golden years of tennis. So from your vantage point, Australian Open 03, you call all 4 slams at one point, finals in 3 of them. What was it like from your position watching this era of men's tennis that just took the game to new heights and might not be ever seen in its entirety again?
Yeah, it's precious, man. It's priceless. Like you, I don't take it for granted. I hate to say we're never going to see again, because we're already seeing the emergence of 2 all-time greats in Alcaraz and Sinner going at each other, lifting the level of tennis, period. But, to see Rafa as a teenager playing Leighton Hewitt in the Australian Open and going to a practice court and seeing what the buzz was about for this young Spanish lefty, and then, seeing Federer and dealing with him as an underachiever, a guy who hadn't put the pieces together, amazing talented gifts he had, and then watching him at Wimbledon win the very first year we covered Wimbledon was in 03, which is Roger's first title. So you can't ask for better timing than that, arriving in that moment, the beginning of the Federer era at SW19. And then obviously along comes Novak, and you've got an unbelievable era of tennis. And so you almost got spoiled. As you came to expect these super matchups, and they were so good and so dominant that not very many people were able to disrupt the rhythm of that. And so, sitting in the stands and watching Rafa and Roger in the 2008 Wimbledon final, we didn't have the rights to the final at that point. And so I got to be a fan of that match, and I got to be a fan at some other huge moments in the sport until I got the opportunity to call them. And then the rise of Serena, and seeing, as I mentioned, Serena and Venus. Serena's already established as a champion when I came into tennis as a commentator, but just watching her whole run. And I don't get a chance to do that in college sports, to say the least. They come and go very quickly, right? Your career is done like that, and there's a flash. And you remember watching what these guys were like. You become fans of them as you watch the NFL on Sunday. In tennis, to see the career arc of Rafa as an 18-year-old, Rafa as a guy double that age, right? Yeah. Novak, 20 straight years at Wimbledon. Roger, obviously, and Serena and Venus and others. To watch the absolute brilliance of that career arc, trying to harness their talents and make their way, achieving pinnacle, peak, dominance. Then that begins to slip, and they have to scrape and claw and summon everything they've got. Yeah. To try to maintain that for as long as they possibly can, right? Which is where Novak is at the moment. We've seen Roger and Rafa do that, and Serena obviously as well. And it's so compelling, and to get to know them as people and to get to know them as players, so when you broadcast a match, you can kind of feel what's going on with them, right? Mm-hmm. You can call Serena at the U.S. Open in the the famous final with Osaka and sort of have a catalog of matches and experiences and conversations with her and her coaches and her dad to draw upon.
Yeah.
Try to get a read on that. That is priceless. And you only get that if you're lucky enough to hang around a long time. And these players provide that kind of incredible career arc. And so I look forward to it because, I called Carlos winning U.S. Open as a teenager.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm around, for a long time. It seems Sinner battle for these titles. And I'll get to say that, hey, I was there when he broke through. I was actually there before he won the U.S. Open, watching him on the outer courts at Miami.
Yeah.
But, that is so cool. And it's almost unique to tennis, right? Maybe golf, you'd say, but they have these long kind of careers, and you get to see every stage of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we were spoiled. You had stats like Federer making, 10 major finals in a row, just constantly getting there, making all those quarters. And I always thought that the thing that separated the big three in particular and Serena were they got knocked off the perch. They got taken down and they regrouped and got back to number one again. And it's just such an impressive feat. There was a couple times, though, when you were calling matches, and you mentioned some. I wanted to go over a few of your greatest matches, your favorite matches called. But on that short list for me is obviously Federer Nadal, Australian Open 2017. And I remember at the very end of that match, you had a line where it was the fans sneaking out, where it was like, I think we're all just really lucky to be a part of this, watching this in this moment in time. And I think those are the separate matches, right? Like certain things where you can, you're a part of history. It's hard to say that for all these matches, but there's certain things that just you can tell in the moment, right? You're calling them that this is going to stand the test of time.
Oh, absolutely. That's the joy of it, though. You show up in an unscripted sports, you never know when you're going to see one of those. Now, if it's the all-time greats we're talking about, the odds are better because when they achieve something, it automatically becomes part of tennis history. But what I love, Mitch, is just you just never know. I mean, I have great memories of calling early round matches at, not that Indian Wells or Miami or Cincy or Canada are small tournaments, but we covered some Masters for many years and some 500s, and I don't approach those as though they're not potentially significant parts of tennis history, but it's not quite the same as the biggest stages. But that's what's so cool is you show up. It's the first game, and you start, and you might see something unfold that's truly special. And when you're in the moment, sometimes it's okay to pull back. And tennis, when you call it or watch it, can be an endless parade of points. It's our job for the viewers that aren't that clued in or not, long-time tennis fans to say, hey, right, antenna's up. This is an important moment. This is an important moment where the internal conversation of both these players right now is very active. There's a lot of static in the brain. Anything can happen here. So mark this moment and let's see what happens. And that's the beauty of it too. You got two people out there battling their own demons as well as their opponent. And what's so compelling about it. And it doesn't come to mind as one of the all-time great marathon matches, but I just watched the other day Andy Murray serving it out against Novak to win his first Wimbledon. And Wimbledon's Instagram feed had a compressed version of that final game, which if people listening remember was incredibly powerfully compelling. Okay. Straight set match. But that could have turned at any moment. And I get goosebumps. I got them right now thinking about that. And 70 some years since a Brit male had won Wimbledon, and Andy's out there carrying the weight of all that history, and it's 40 love. Okay, it's triple championship. Boom, 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 3 quick points. And he's on the brink, and it's going to happen. And then it's deuce. 3 championship points have gone away.
Yeah.
Then Novak has 3 break points in that game. Right? Murray dumped serving for this title. That could go anywhere.
Right.
We know how Novak can fight back. That could have gone anywhere. And John and Patrick and I sitting in the bunker knew that. And no one was breathing in that court. No one watching in England was breathing at that point. And for him to fight off 3 break points with brilliant tennis, like if you get a chance to watch that, not you, but anybody listening, go back and watch that last game. And we didn't say a thing for 6 points. We sat there and just let it play out until it got back to deuce. We had set everything up in the commercial break before. Fred Perry, here's who he was. Here's what Murray's trying to do. Here's how we got here. Here's all the close calls he's had. Here's what this game in this moment means to him and this country and this tournament. And then we could just shut up and let 6 points in a row go by. Now, John broke the spell by saying, "Can I breathe right now?"
I didn't remember that, actually. Yeah.
Which is the perfect thing to say.
Yeah.
No one had taken a breath.
Yeah.
And then it unfolds, and then Murray plays these extended rallies. I mean, brilliant, like stab volleys to fight off break points and get back to championship point, and then win it finally. I think it was his 4th championship point. And then he climbs up to see his family right by us, like he's in front of our window. What we call in the bunker, the glass is obviously up during play, but the minute the match is over, they run in there and they take these old steel bolts, and the window comes down so we can see the post-match without that barrier and hear it. And so Andy at this point is like right in front of us. I remember seeing that he wore these heavy ankle braces, remember?
Right. Oh, yeah.
It's right. He's climbing up to see his mom and his team and Lendl and everything, and the brace is like right there. Those things I will never forget as long as I live. The chances to be able to kind of document stuff like that, where you're seeing something that's important.
Yeah, there's so much history and there's so much intrigue in the sport. It's truly remarkable in the drama that it brings. I think you said a lot there, and I think one of the there's so many matches you were a part of. Djokovic, Nadal, Australia, 2012, a classic. Which no bathroom breaks for the commentators either, or do you get time to leave the booth?
Well, there's no structured breaks, but you got to do what you got to do in 5 hours and 53 minutes.
Yeah, that was. That was
already in the booth an hour before the final. So it's but no, that was Patrick and I were calling that one, and I thought I'd never see anything approaching that again, and then a couple weeks ago we saw Alcaraz and Sinner go almost that long in an equally compelling match. So that's what's cool about this sport is the time passes, legends come and go, but the vacuum and the void somehow is always filled.
Right. And I did want to mention, you said the Serena Osaka match. I thought that was one of the most intriguing, entertaining, maybe for a different reason. As a broadcaster, it's a different type of match to call. I had a story that I was going to tell you out on a Saturday at a sports bar. That match is on College Football Saturday. Only time I've seen this. That match was so dramatic. Sound at the bar went to that match. They're like, something's going on here. So your voice was playing, calling that match, which, there was a lot, and we don't have to get into all of it, but that's a different type of tone. That's a different type of match to call. You have to be focused maybe for a different reason on what's happening.
Absolutely. And I think what's worth noting about that match and the U.S. Open in general is how chaotic Arthur Ashe Stadium can be and how hard it is sometimes to even figure out what exactly is going on. But the chair umpire and the player, obviously there was so much controversy and friction there. The coaching box involved, they were at the far end of the court from where our booth is in Ashe. But it took everything to kind of figure out, wait, what the hell is going on? But point penalty, and what is at the root of this, and what did Serena say, and what did he say in the chair, and it was very, very challenging, and there's no blueprint for that. As you said, we hadn't really kind of seen that before in a Grand Slam final. So I'm proud of the fact we documented it. Obviously, you think you can do better when you go back, but it is tough on the fly. They did a poor job of explaining what was going on from the chair umpire's perspective, and I've had words about that. Tennis fans deserve to be told what's going on in the way that NFL fans or college football fans get the microphone turned on and things are explained to them. And they've done a better job in recent years, but it was hard to figure out in the moment with all the noise and the chaos what was happening.
Yeah, it was fascinating television. And as a tennis fan, there's some things you liked, some things you didn't, but you guys did a great job and shows you true. Like there's never going to be perfection in your job and what you do. You're going to do the best you can. You're always going to be, we're our toughest critics, right? You're going to look back at matches and moments being like, maybe I could have done better, but still got to celebrate the victories when you get them.
You also have to remember too, that there's a lot of layers to that. Everybody watching in America, most of the people are viewing it through the Serena lens. They're Serena fans. They're in her camp. It's about her, whether she wins or loses, but you have to be, very mindful. This was Naomi Osaka's moment. And you remember the trophy presentation was marred by a lot of stuff. And she she's talked about that a lot, but her biggest breakthrough moment was minutes after all this controversy and chaos. And so even navigating that was a challenge. And for so long, it was like not the opponent wins, but Serena loses, Roger loses, Rafa loses. The headline was their loss, not a massive moment for the opponent. But you have to, when you document it, give most of the weight to the winner. And so it's a constant dance to figure that out. And we'll always go through that in tennis.
We got more with Chris Fowler here on the Inside in Tennis podcast as we move along in the tennis calendar. It's Wimbledon coming up, and I wanted to, finish out here with some thoughts on the current game and where we are. And yeah, the game being in good hands is an understatement. We saw Sinner Alcaraz play an all-time classic, the longest Roland Garros final, and there's dynamics of a rivalry in tennis, Chris, but when you see the star quality that Alcaraz has, how Sinner's built himself up to get on this level, despite the losing streak he has to Alcaraz, number one in the world by a mile, the rivalry has all the dynamics of something that could be special. Now, longevity, we don't know, but when you see what Alcaraz brings to sport and how Sinner is matching that, seems like we're in for another special run.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's exciting to think about that. I've seen, fortunately, quite a few of their matches, and from battles in Miami to being able to call the one at the U.S. Open, these two guys were, I thought, in the moment, maybe elevating the game in front of us. We've all enjoyed what Roger, Rafa, Novak are capable of on the men's side, but I thought that the level of play, the shot making, as deep in that match as it went, we saw it again in Roland Garros, was breathtaking. And these guys are different personalities, a little bit different styles, different athletically. And so that makes it fun. And the fact that Sinner has been, as you said on the computer, a fairly dominant number one despite a 3-month suspension is pretty staggering. But Carlos has got him 5 times in a row. And his pedigree in Grand Slam finals is much better. And his record in long marathon matches is much better. Sinner still hasn't won a match that goes beyond 3 hours and 50 minutes. Okay, like he's 0-8. So he has got to get that solved if he's going to beat Alcaraz in these big matches, because they're not going to be quick and easy. So there's so many compelling aspects of this rivalry as it grows each time they collide in a big stage. Are we going to be lucky enough to see it again at Wimbledon? I mean, that's what people are hoping for. Unless you're a Novak fan or you want to see something unpredictable happen. But you can't take it for granted, because you got to win 6 matches to get there. And I think that's really challenging to do. And what's also fascinating too, Mitch, is, as your listeners will know, Sinner and Alcaraz sort of approach it differently, play it differently, have different levels of consistency versus peaks and valleys. Carlos's high note is a half gear better than anybody else, including Jannik. It's a lot better than most guys, obviously. But I think at his highest note, we saw it in Paris, that to me is as breathtaking as anything I've seen, maybe since Federer's peak or whatever. It was what he's capable of doing in sustained points when it matters the most, at his best, is crazy. I watched the end of that match in an airport lounge before getting on a plane to go to Europe for a vacation. And you talk about like the bar you mentioned. The United Lounge in Newark is not a place where tennis fans congregate. But people were just like, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. And the level of play just in those moments, and specifically, I think Carlos's shot making was mind-blowing. Now, Jannik plays at an A level for longer periods of time, doesn't have the dips. But that's what makes it so compelling in an Alcaraz match, right? Can he survive a slow start? Can he survive a mid-match dip? Because those are going to happen. I don't know he's going to ever be able to cure that, honestly, over 5 sets. And so when they get together, that's a really fascinating aspect.
Yeah, Alcaraz we know the star quality. You've seen it. Like, he's got all the tools to be a star in this sport for a long time. But having so many options, maybe sometimes he picks the flashiest one over the shortest one. But that's to be expected. There's a level of fight in him. I think we saw at Roland Garros that was the next layer to this guy's a legend in the sport. because Jannik was right there. And maybe, Chris, the beauty of tennis as opposed to college football, you have a horrible championship loss. You got to wait another year, another offseason to get there. We could see this potentially in a week's time, 2 weeks' time at Wimbledon.
Well, I mean, obviously you arrive at Wimbledon and you see the guys on the opposite side of the draw, and you wonder, are we going to be as lucky to see, Alcaraz versus Sinner, for the first time battling for a Wimbledon title? And they got to win 6 matches each. Obviously, as I speak now, the draw isn't out. So where's Novak going to land? What's the path going to be for either guy to get there? And obviously, the wear and tear on Carlos is real. Jannik trying to bounce back from one of the all-time gutting losses anyone has ever suffered. Had a hiccup on the grass already. Ran into Mr. Bublik. And how I think he's pretty steady and very strong mentally, but how will he handle that? And then Carlos, you put everything you got into winning Roland Garros, 5.5 hours. You somehow go to Queens and navigate through a tough early match against Munar and win another grass title, and then basically go to Wimbledon and begin practicing. I mean, it's a lot to ask. That's why it's rarely been done. The double, and the fact that Borg did it 3 years in a row is still mind-boggling to me. But that was a different time.
Yeah.
So I hope we're lucky enough to get it. If we do, tickets will be £15,000, and people will be locked in.
We're wanting it, we're needing it, but yeah, that's the beauty of this sport. A guy like Alex Bublik could pop up and give us some variety and maybe make things interesting. But yeah, 2 special talents. And Chris Fowler, you've been very generous with your time. Before I let you go, just more thoughts, I guess, on Wimbledon. You're going to be traveling this weekend. Another edition of the championships that you say, and I agree, is the best event to call and to be at. Thoughts on maybe what the women's side might look like, and another intrigue as we get ready for a fortnight at the All England Club.
Yeah, you need a full hour to unravel the women's field, don't you?
It's crazy.
It's become the Wimbledon women's/ladies singles title has been one of the least predictable things in sports in recent years. Almost like trying to predict the Kentucky Derby with a 20-horse field. And you have 3 consecutive long shot winners, because remember, Rybakina was an extreme long shot when she broke through and won it, and Andrusova, Kochikova. I mean, no one could have seen that coming, and they're long shots again, by the way, if you look at the odds makers here. So it's been perilous to predict on the women's side what's going to happen. That it's compelling for a different reason. I think most people would say they want to see the collisions of the top players. Obviously, American fans would like to see Coco Gauff break through and do what she hasn't yet been able to do at Wimbledon. The place, obviously, where she broke through, beating Venus as a really young kid, but hasn't made the quarters yet and hasn't been able to manage. I don't know if there are weaknesses or liabilities in her game, but the forehand swing, the second serve, she hasn't been able to, play her best at Wimbledon yet. But maybe this is the year off of a triumph for Roland Garros. I certainly know that American fans are hoping for that. And what an amazing start to the year with Keys and Coco winning the first 2 majors and the chance to sort of keep that going. Do we get an American women calendar slam combo? I mean, that would be pretty cool.
He read my mind.
But who the hell knows where it's going to go? I mean, Paolini, Jabeur. I mean, we've had so many players break through who've made the final but haven't won it. You got to throw them in the mix as well when you talk about how unpredictable it's been. Sabalenka on paper is the favorite, but obviously she's been a little bit, I don't know if cursed is the word of this tournament, from being banned from playing to suffering a shoulder injury and a tearful withdrawal right in the break last year. So she's had a tough history there, and maybe this is her time to step forward and do what the odds makers expect her to do. But hey, we'll all find out together.
We all will. Yeah, you read my mind. If it's not maybe a new star emerging like Amira Andreeva, who's been rising to this point, maybe it's the combo calendar slam. Maybe it's Jessie Pegula, Emma Navarro, or Amanda Anisimova stepping up here, and we get 4 different American winners this year. Putting on my American bias a little bit, but Chris, no, this was a blast. And the last thing I have for you here on the Inside in Tennis podcast is, after all these years, all these matches, going into the booth that first time as a match is about to start, you still get those pre-match jitters when you have like a big fight, big match feel. Is it still little butterflies in your stomach?
Yeah, I mean, you try to reframe nervousness as excitement. That's a great thing to do in life when you're confronted with something that you're nervous about. is to feel I'm excited. I'm not nervous because it's basically the same chemicals in your body. I don't think I'm nervous anymore. You want to do well. You want to be as prepared as you possibly can. And then basically you're like any viewer in the respect that you want to see something special. You want to see something dramatic, compelling, that's going to be memorable. We haven't always had that in the women's side at Wimbledon. We've had that in abundance on the men's side in recent years. So you kind of root for that. You just root for drama. You root for something that rewards the people. It's not easy being a tennis fan, as you know. The commitment that you make to follow this sport around the calendar, up all night, up in the morning, setting aside, what do I set aside? 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 5.5 hours?
Yeah.
I mean, and never knowing what you're going to get when you tune in. You want those folks to be rewarded. And so I always root for something epic and something compelling and memorable. And that's where I think the hope comes from. Because when that doesn't deliver, you're disappointed like any viewer. When it does deliver, you're along for the ride and you know you're seeing something you'll never forget.
Well said, as I should be expecting you to put things into perfect perspective. Chris Fowler, this was a blast, the titan of the broadcast industry. Make sure you check out his podcast as well, Who You Got. I had to gas you up on the way out, but really generous with your time.
I don't know if I've ever been called a titan, and it's certainly not deserving, but I'm just someone like anyone else who's in a fortunate position and loves the sport. I've loved talking with you. Keep up the great work. Let's do it again sometime. And
Absolutely.
And let's buckle up and hope we get something special in England.
Absolutely. And I could say this with certainty. I'll be hearing a lot from you in the next couple weeks. So a lot, all the best. Safe travels, Chris Fowler. This was fun. Thanks for joining the Inside in Tennis podcast.
Thanks, buddy. My pleasure.